I'm joined in studio by Mathius Muindi, an Independent Political Risk Analyst based here in Nairobi, specializing on the Horn of Africa and Great Lakes regions. Mathius, always a pleasure to have you with us. Of course, the UN reporting that the Central African Republic may be getting safer. What do you attribute this to? The
biggest cause of, let's say, what we can call a sense of calm in Central Africa right now is the increased international focus on the conflict in that country. This conflict has been going on for the last 10 years, but in the last 1 year we have seen concerted effort, and that's what led to the peace agreement which was signed in February. And this international focus has also forced some of the foreign backers of these armed groups to also suspend that support. And finally, international prosecution of some of the perpetrators of these abuses in Central Africa, that has frightened some of the militia leaders to scale down the attacks, especially on civilians, which have been going on for the last 6-7 years.
If we take a closer look at the deal that was signed in February, of course it was a long journey getting to this particular deal with many others that didn't quite hold. What are some of the standout elements of this deal that you say, that you might say contribute directly to the lasting peace that we're seeing so far?
One of the biggest elements in this deal was it paved the way for the entry of some of the key armed groups in this country. There are dozens of armed groups in Central Africa, and previous deals were very unclear on what role they would play politically in the country. But now they have specific roles. So when you look at it specifically, there are provisions in which some of the most powerful militia leaders were appointed to very senior positions, especially, as security advisors to the Prime Minister. That puts them at the center of the security infrastructure in Central Africa and also decision-making in government. That is something which has gone a way to maybe assure these armed opponents of the government that we can sit down with this government, we can try to come up with something and try to end this conflict and maybe serve the people of this country.
And of course, it's barely 6 months since February and this deal was signed. What does the country need to do now to make sure that the sense of peace will last?
The most important thing is that the signatories of this agreement, and there are many of them, there are about 14 armed groups, and the government on itself, they need to make sure they stick to the commitments they made. The other thing is that they also need to change the mind frame. Some of the supporters of these militia leaders, they still have not adjusted this peace agreement in place. And the final thing is that the international community needs to keep the pressure on the signatories and also surrounding countries, especially ending any support to the armed groups. Finally, the international community has to ensure that the prosecutions of any perpetrators continues, because that is the only way you can assure people in Central Africa we have a peace agreement. They don't want to see it as another arrangement whereby political leaders and armed militia leaders share power, but the abuses which were perpetrated, nobody is held accountable for that.
Exactly. That accountability is key. Thank you so much to Mathius Muindi here in studio with us on those latest developments in Central African Republic.